Japan tourism has gone through some major changes once again. With tourism returning to almost 100% of pre-pandemic levels, there have been quite a few issues with overcrowding due to the recent surge of tourists. The iconic Kyoto bus pass was canceled, Mount Fuji got a visitor cap, and the JR Pass got a price hike, all in an attempt to alleviate congestion from tourism both domestic and abroad. And as I mentioned in my last video, the Japanese government announced that they would be drafting official over-tourism countermeasures and would release them in the near future. Well, as of this last October, those new measures have been officially released. So today we're going to break down what exactly all these measures are, what they will mean for you, and other recent tourism updates that you should be aware of as you plan for your trip to Japan. Some of it is good news and some of it is bad news, but all of it is essential to make your vacation stress-free. Alright, let's get into these newest updates so you can plan your long-awaited trip to Japan. But before we get started, I have a huge announcement that I'm sure a lot of you will be happy to hear. I am now officially offering my professional services to help you plan your next trip to Japan with my newly formed business, Hidden Japan Journeys. After living in Tokyo for years, I have learned dozens of tips and tricks to navigate Japan with ease and found hundreds of hidden things in Tokyo I haven't even mentioned on my channel yet. With this extensive knowledge, I can help personally create the perfect travel itinerary that is catered just for you. Not only that, but I can also provide one-on-one phone consultations to help answer any personal questions or concerns you might have as you plan your trip to Japan. With these two effective services, I can help make your Japan planning as effortless and as stress-free as possible. If you are interested in utilizing any of these services, don't hesitate to contact me at my business email, which you'll find in the description below. Why leave your once-in-a-lifetime trip to Japan up to chance? Contact me today. Alright, now that you know my big channel announcement, let's get back to all those other major updates you need to know. The yen is at its weakest point in decades. While a lot of recent travel updates haven't been the greatest of news for tourists, you'll be happy to hear that the yen has reached its weakest point against the dollar in decades. In late October, the yen weakened past Japan's critical benchmark of 150 yen to the US dollar. And even though the Japanese government has been doing everything it can to intervene and artificially make the yen stronger, their attempts have largely been futile, as the dollar now sits comfortably over the 150 benchmark and is even peaking near the 152 yen to the dollar mark. So obviously what this means for you, the tourist, is that it has never been a cheaper time to come visit Japan. With this absurdly strong exchange rate, everything you buy in Japan will essentially be at a huge discount for you, and that's not even including if you head to a duty-free store. And this strong exchange rate is highly unlikely to change anytime soon. To put it simply, this US dollar to Japan yen exchange rate is highly dependent on how the US government handles its interest rates. The higher the US Fed makes its interest rates in America, the stronger the dollar becomes. And because the US Fed interest rates have remained so high for so long, it will be pretty unlikely that the Feds will lower the interest rates enough to make a big difference for the US dollar and Japan exchange rate anytime soon. I'll be keeping a close eye on the US dollar and Japan yen exchange rate and be sure to update you if there are any other major changes to this exchange rate in the near future. And while the weak yen has been mostly good news for foreign tourists that are visiting Japan, this has also been a contributing factor to Japan's over-tourism crisis, which has begun to see some pushback from Japan's government. Just a couple weeks ago, Japan's government released its initial wave of over-tourism countermeasures, and there have been quite a few new measures that have been introduced. So in order to make this easy to follow, I'm going to break each one down one by one, share my thoughts about each measure, and then go over how exactly it'll apply to you, the tourist. The first measure is a pretty obvious solution. The government plans to bolster its taxi and bus fleets to help better cope with the spiking demand in popular tourist cities. This first measure is really a no-brainer, as increasing the supply is the most straightforward way to meet the rising demand in any business. However, my main concern is how feasible this plan will actually be. If you have watched my previous Japan update videos, then you should already know that Japan's hospitality sector has been facing a very serious employee shortage, including taxi employees as well. So even if they can get more buses and taxis into circulation, it is pretty unlikely they will be able to man the bigger public transport fleet with more drivers. And with Japan's ongoing depopulation crisis, it will only become more difficult to replace already existing drivers as they get too old to work. But we will just have to wait and see on how they will actually carry out this plan and how effective it actually will be. On the same note of public transportation, the next major over-tourism measure they release is to create bus routes specifically for tourists and increasing the train and bus fares for tourists during peak travel hours. The newly proposed bus routes will go directly to tourist attractions and tourist hotspots rather than hitting all the local stops residents typically use. These tourist bus routes will be considered express routes in an attempt to alleviate congestion on bus routes meant for local residents. But not all of this is good news, as the government plans to also slap on higher fares for those new express bus routes. Not only that, but they plan to do the same thing for train fares during peak transit hours as well. The hope is to encourage tourists to travel during off hours of the day and help alleviate congestion for residents during the morning and evening rush hour time periods. Now, if you couldn't tell, most of these policies are pointed directly at dealing with Kyoto's over-tourism issues, as the easiest way to get around Kyoto are the buses and taxis. And here are my thoughts on this. I definitely like the idea of having specific buses travel solely to tourist hotspots and major train stations, as this will help both tourists and residents alike. Not only will this allow tourists to get to their planned destinations faster because there are fewer stops, but this will also help locals because there will be less tourists taking up space as they commute on their normal work routes. However, what I don't necessarily think is a good idea is hiking bus and train fares during peak transit hours, because that really just won't help anyone out. They have already partially addressed the bus overcrowding with these new express bus routes, so charging extra to ride these express buses during rush hour will only push tourists to ride the local buses instead, canceling out the whole reason they made these express routes in the first place. Not only that, but hiking train fares during rush hour might have a slight effect on lowering tourist congestion, but it is also going to have a negative impact on the locals as well. Because most people can't dictate what time they get off work, this will also hurt local residents' wallets, as they will be forced to pay the higher train fares just like the tourists if they want to get home at a reasonable hour. And with the weak yen and Japan's economy already being in bad shape, this will only hurt the economy even more, as locals will have less money to spend on other things due to the heightened train fares. They do mention that locals will be able to skip this heightened train fare during rush hours, but I would be very interested to see how Kyoto's government would plan on managing that efficiently. As always, if there are any updates to this newest tourism measure, I'll be sure to let you know first. And finally, the last major announcement from the Japanese government to help combat over-tourism was their introduction of 11 model tourist sites, as they called it, in which they will begin to heavily advertise to foreign tourists. These 11 tourist sites were selected out of a list of 62 different areas in Japan based on their stunning views, rich heritage, and unique experiences you can find there. Now that Japan has selected these 11 specific areas, their goal will be to heavily advertise these regions in an effort to help reroute tourists from the common hotspots of Osaka, Kyoto, and Tokyo. This last move by the government is by far one of their best announcements and is honestly long overdue. Not only will this help reroute tourists to other regions of Japan, but it will also give a much needed economic boost to these areas, providing more jobs for the local residents, and ultimately hope to encourage more people to move out of the Tokyo area, which has been an issue plaguing the government in recent years. The only downside to this plan is it will definitely take some time to get the promotions out to foreign tourists and convince them to visit these new 11 regions instead of having tourists just head to the typical 3 cities of Tokyo, Kyoto, and Osaka. And I think one of the most effective ways that Japan's tourism agency could get these new 11 regions out to foreign tourists faster is by working closely with social media influencers to promote these new areas. With their dedicated audiences, social media influencers will have much more of an impact on getting the word out instead of just doing large rounds of undirected advertising. Overall, I'm very happy that Japan has finally decided decided to take some big steps in promoting the less known areas of Japan. This country is so much more than just its 3 popular cities of Tokyo, Kyoto, and Osaka, and I really hope that these promotions are successful and help encourage tourists to visit these other great 11 regions of Japan. While these new tourism measures are pretty vague and really don't have any clear guidelines yet, you have to remember that these are just the beginning stages of their new round of tourism measures to help alleviate the congestion and make your experience in Japan a lot more enjoyable. I am hopeful that they will be more specific and lay out more guidelines to help tourists out in the near future. And as always, as soon as those updates are released, you can count on me updating you as soon as they're available. And again, not only do I give these news updates, but now with my new business, if you want some personal advice from me and have a one-on-one conversation or plan a secret travel itinerary that no one else in this world will ever experience but you, then contact me on my business email today. Like this video if you found it useful. Subscribe for more Japan content and email me if you want to use my services to plan your perfect trip to Japan. Also, don't forget to check out all my affiliate links in the description below. All right, that's gonna do it, and until next time, I'll see you then.